Let's see are we live?
Looks like it.
Greetings, Earthlings, fellow Earthlings. I'm here with my mix engineer. He's not mine personally, but I think of him as mine for the next half hour. Michael Walter out of Nashville, Tennessee, who has been working on some songs with me and for me, and we're going to discuss the mix process, all different dynamics of that. So this is Mike.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody.
And yeah. So he mixed one of the songs on my brand new EP, which just came out Friday. Yeah. And
awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really, really happy with it. I'm super happy with the mix of the second track, which is called Glasgow, and which you mixed.
I enjoyed that one too. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. And I'm often in on mixes. I mean, I'm very respectful. I just mostly listen and learn, but I have input, and I often take part in mixes because there's so much I can learn when I hear, okay, let's hear the difference between those two reverbs. Mm-hmm. You know, I love Absolutely. Being present for that and doing the compare and contrast, you know, the A-B thing. So for this mix, I was not present, but I knew that you were going to do a fantastic job.
No pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't think I said that at the get-go, but I think it was implied that would happen. And it came out great. I would like to know from you, and we're going to play a little bit of it for people in a minute here, but first I'd like to know how you would talk about the song in terms of genre and how that affects how you would approach a mix, because I don't know, is this song organic? It's not electronic, but there's a lot of electricity in it, and you know how you thought about it.
Yeah, that's an interesting, very good question. That's an interesting question too, because this is a hard song for me to quantify as a genre, to be quite honest. It's so different to me. I think this was in the email when we started going back and forth about what the song was. Because I hadn't actually been introduced to you yet when I first started the mix. We actually, it was David Dorn who came to me and said, hey, I think there's something that you can do. Can you mix this for her and give her a good product? And I was like, yeah, hopefully, you know.
Yeah.
So when I heard it, I actually didn't really come into it thinking any genre, to be quite honest. If anything, in my head was like, oh, it's coming from David. He's such a prominent session guy in town that it's probably country, but it was the opposite of country.
No, it's definitely not country.
I think what I really, going back to the emails that we did, I described it as more of like a guttural, visceral Scottish anthem, and I don't know, and I don't know of another way to describe it, to be quite honest. It's not rock.
No.
Folk.
No.
It's not Americana.
No.
It's not really world music.
No.
It's really not pop music, you know, and it doesn't conveniently fit in a box. So to me, I approached the mix purely from, honestly, like what you were singing. It was anthemic and needed to be really vibe oriented. It was such a it was just so driving constantly. You know?
Yes.
The vocals lended themselves towards kind of just trying to soar over top of that more than anything else. So I literally just, I didn't think of genre. I didn't think of any other references, which made it actually a lot easier creatively.
Yeah. So, to not be trying to compare to something else and draw something out of it that would be similar to that other thing.
Totally.
It wasn't a helpful approach.
No, not at all. In general, because a lot of times people will give you mixed references, and it's always, you know, those are always good things, but sometimes it can kind of really push you in a box, direction that you necessarily wouldn't have gone in.
Yeah.
Hear a song a certain way, and the artist was like, well, I kind of wanted this to be like Beyonce, and you're like, well, that's kind of never going to happen with the nature. And not as an indication of just like, you know, how you sing or anything like that, but they have an idea of what they want it to be that's so completely removed from what the song actually is.
Absolutely. I think that happens with songwriters.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things I like to do is when I work with musicians, I just give them free rein. I'll have specific ideas for sure, but I work with guys on the level of David Dorn, session guy in Nashville, for those who are listening, and he's a wonderful, wonderful musician.
Yeah.
As are the other guys that I recorded that song with. And so I can just give them free rein and they will do something fabulous. And
Yeah.
they'll interpret, they'll understand where I'm going without us really having to have much discussion at all. I can just run through it on my little, I write on this, it's it's an electric ukulele. It's a custom.
Nice.
Yeah.
That thing's awesome, man.
It
Nice.
is. It's totally awesome. That's a whole other conversation, but we have to talk about mixing. So, and they
Yeah.
can go to town with it, and then it comes to you. And for some people who are listening, I don't know how many musicians we have listening who it's going to be, this would be like reading them the ABCs, and how many people are listening because they're interested in how music is made, which I want to offer. So what a mix engineer does is he takes all the tracks that have been recorded by the various musicians and puts them together. He mixes them.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, I think when I first started trying to understand mixing, back in the day, back when, Abbey Road was being mixed, they called them balance engineers. They weren't
Really?
called mix engineers. And I think that's still an appropriate title. Really, what we're trying to do is just balance levels against each other.
That's a great
Things, like certain things stand out in certain sections, and we're just always constantly trying to balance levels. And that's really, at the end of the day, that's it. Hopefully you don't overcomplicate it too much. I mean, there is complicated technique involved, but that hopefully is the purest of what we do, right?
Yeah.
And just to point out, because I thought it was interesting you said that, like Tim Galloway, who we're both mutual acquaintances on, he played on Glasgow, I believe.
He's a guitarist, and he played acoustic guitar and electric guitar on Glasgow. Yeah.
Also a fabulous session musician. Rolling Stone named him one of the session musicians to look out for, kind of thing, in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
But Tim and I didn't know that we knew you.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of thing, and he found out that I was mixing Glasgow, and I talked to him about it. I was like, man, it's just such a cool song. Like, I think actually I reached out to him because I was like, man, you did this, like, sounded like a very like Thomas Matfumo kind of like African part that he did in like the second verse or something like that. And that really stuck out to me as something that like Nashville doesn't get to do a lot of.
Yeah. That's
Texted him and I was like, dude, really cool part. And he was like, oh yeah, man, I didn't know you're mixing. That's great. That's great. She's such a cool person to work for because she just allows us to be free.
Yeah, man, what I'm looking for, and this goes for mix engineers as well as any other kind of artist, producer, whatever, I'm looking for your creativity. That's what I want. If I could do it myself, I got my job to do. I don't need to tell you what to do. What I want.
Hopefully,
yeah. Get down off that chair.
I mean, and honestly, that's like a true testament to being able to like really connect with somebody musically, is that you don't have to tell them a lot of what to do. They're going to do the right thing, or you like their ideas. It may not be, but you're like, oh, that's cool. I like that. That's great.
Yeah. And you speak to each other through the music. Now,
absolutely.
I like what you're saying about what a mix engineer does is balance things. And what I want to say about that for people who are curious about it is there are so many, that sounds like a simple thing, but there are so many things within music to balance. There's so many dynamics. It's not just how loud something is, it's where it's placed in the stereo field. It's what kind of what's the frequency range that it's in? Does it cut through? How often does it occur? And there are just so many parts to this that I was hoping we could talk about that, and you would talk about that a little. And I think maybe what we should do is just play a little of the track for our listeners.
So this is I'll play the back half of verse 2 going into chorus 2. Yeah.
Right.
Just give me a thumbs up to stop.
Yeah, bring that up a little. Here we're into a whole other thing. Yeah. So we moved into the bridge there. We went from the back end of the second verse into the chorus and then into the bridge from there. And those 3 changes right there have got your hands full, right?
Yes, totally. I mean, and honestly, going into a second verse is always tricky because you're coming out of a first chorus and you want to maintain momentum.
Right.
You don't want to have it overtake the chorus that you just heard. It can't be it can't be more dynamic.
Right. But it has to keep it rolling.
Exactly. So you got to keep going. And then the bridge, generally always coming somewhere after a second verse, the bridge has to be the top of the song. I mean, 9 times out of 10, songwriting dictates the bridge is the apex. So constantly trying to do kind of this, if it's a linear curve that is kind of cool, but not necessarily, there still has to be peaks and valleys along the way reaching to that bridge. I can say it's easy from a, hey, we're just all balancing levels, and that's like nice, and like not really necessarily the true story of it. But I mean, as you just said, I think I tend to view it more as like a frequency jigsaw puzzle. Else,
So different frequencies aren't stepping on each other's toes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's really one of the things. And with writing, with producing, arranging, mixing, everything, the negative space is just as important as the filled space, the positive space.
Absolutely.
Which brings me to the thought about what you said about the bridge needing to be the apex of the song. There are different ways for an apex to occur. And in this case, what happens is it smooths out and it kind of holds back and gets quieter.
It does.
But
emotionally, it doesn't.
Exactly. That's where there's almost like a longing comes in, because the rest of the song is really driving. The song is about being on the road and trying to get to the city of Glasgow in time for a radio show, basically. Yeah. Okay. That's all it is. True story.
Which make for the best songs.
Right. Yeah. No, it comes from the heart.
Exactly.
So it's driving along. I asked the drummer, who I know you must also know, Grady Saxman, who's and you're a drummer as well, and that's that's another conversation.
Actually, a lot of mixed engineers are.
Yeah, we need to talk about that too. So I told Grady I needed a marching snare, because we are, we're going through, we're crossing the bridge, we're getting to Glasgow no matter what. Yeah. So, and I wrote it. As I wrote it, I had that sound in mind, that tempo and that rhythm in mind. And I was picturing, I mean, I can hear bagpipes. I didn't subject anyone to bagpipes, but we did have to have the marching snare kind of roll through it. And so when you get to the bridge, it's not driving anymore. It's like it's released. And so you have to, and there's a longing, like, yeah, we're going to get there, you have to reflect that in the mix, even though it's there in the instrumentation and in the vocal, in the song itself. But how do you do that in the mix?
I think the easy way to say it is you have to catch on to some kind of vibe, So in this case, we filled a lot of the space with a lot of effects, a lot of reverbs to just try to create tension and release. And that's, you're trying to connect emotionally, and the easiest way to connect on that level, it has to be the performance. Honestly, at the end of the day, no matter what I do to a song, it's never going to overcome or cover up deficiencies in performance.
Right. No. And I certainly would never deliver something to you that was asking for that.
But so like I think a lot of what artists say is like, man, you really killed that bridge or that second chorus, where, man, it's like, I just brought out what the artist already did.
Well, and I think this is a lot of what the mix engineer's job is to elicit the potential that's there. There, actually more than potential that's in the performance, as you say, but would only come across as potential without a really good mix to elicit that.
They're all interlocked. They have, each has its function, and each works together towards the same goal, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. So,
no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to start talking a little bit about the different kind of effects that come into play, and that came into play with this song, which kind of has an organic feel, like I was saying, but also it's definitely electric. It's hooky, but it's not pop. Again, I don't know how much our listeners know, but let's talk about what effects you used on this song and how they work.
Thankfully, I'm looking at the session right here.
I was hoping you would have that pulled up.
Yeah.
I said pop quiz.
Because it's hard, man. It's so hard to remember what you do on a daily basis sometimes,
Yeah, if you're working a lot, which you are.
Well, and just like, you try not to get so like, oh man, well, I used this reverb and I only use this.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's because it changes so much.
For
you
sure.
know?
And in more general terms, even if we don't have brand names, what the general effects are and how they work in
For
putting a
sure.
song.
I think for your vocal, I wanted to do, if I'm looking at it right now, um, I wanted the vocal to be uh, more vibey than necessarily the rest of the, because Tim's doing that really cool kind of South African part, or just that like just really, it's real
That-
staccato, you know. We
yeah, that
want,
kind of bubbling part.
yeah, and
Yeah.
everything is so driving. So the effects for the band behind you need to be fairly short, fairly dry to a certain extent,
Hmm.
so that the vocal itself, because you're singing these Glasgow, like
Yeah.
real long notes. So I wanted the vocal in this instance to be more effects driven than the rest of the band. And so it's trying to step away from the band in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So the band behind you, if they start being too effects driven, start to overtake, and it just makes the vocal get a little like lost in the mix,
Yeah. Hmm.
for lack of a better
Because
term.
yeah, then the vocal is too embedded within the band mix. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't stand out. And you gave such a great performance, and there were so many good vocal moments that it just, it needed to be just different from the band.
Hmm.
And we did. We I put a lot of like longer delay effects on, especially on big notes in the bridge. What we were just talking about. I wanted,
Right.
so the band falls out. There's not really a lot to keep the momentum pushing towards that last chorus when it has to hit even harder.
Hmm.
So I kept really long delays going with really long reverbs to just fill out space. So when it came down, it could still feel like it still opened up a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also when you do that, and by the way, when we say long, we are talking about time length in terms of delay
Yes.
and reverb.
Yeah.
I mean, there's space, there's also 3D space, but in terms of length, we mean time.
Yes.
So it was also appropriate for the bridge because of the feeling that's being expressed in the bridge, which is a kind of almost a yearning kind of a feel. So for it
Yeah.
to be drawn out makes more sense. And you
Yeah.
can, and so if and you can tell from how we're discussing this how important song structure is to a good mix engineer, understanding what has to happen in each section of the song, however it's arranged. In this case, it's verse, chorus, verse, bridge, verse, chorus out, I think.
I
I'm
think so.
pretty,
Yeah. If I'm
yeah.
looking at it, yeah.
So so to reflect the movement, the dynamics between those different sections and capture the arc of the dynamic of the entire song, the engineer has to really be tuned into to all of those kinds of transitions and the energy shifts that happen and where we want to
Absolutely.
be when we start and where we want to be. We got our apex in the bridge, also where we want to be when we finish. Where have we taken people?
Yep.
You
Well,
know?
and I tend to think of, and especially along effects, I tend to try to think of them as emotions, to be quite honest. So if I need something to be really intimate, right in your face, you can't, that's never going to be a really 4 second long reverb and a big cathedral kind of sound, because then that
Right, right.
pushes you so far into a space. It's never going to give you that intimate close up kind of thing.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was yearning. There's a longingness. There's kind of like this like wispy kind of feeling of like you have now retracted into your own self.
Yeah, true. Yep.
And so it's a period of introspection can definitely have this really long cathedral-esque sound, because
Right.
then just like your brain is awash in thought.
Yes, and inside your mind gets very large, and
It does.
reverb definitely reflects different kinds of reverb reflect the size of a space. That's what reverb
Exactly.
is. It's showing how much reverberation can happen in a space of a certain size, which could be a box or it could be a cathedral.
Yeah. And I think the good thing to take out of that though is that it's not necessarily just physical space, it's also emotional space.
Exactly. Yes.
So
Yes. It's designed according to physical space, but we interpret it emotionally. So that's another,
exactly.
a mixing engineer's job is an interpretive job, and you have to be what I think of as a hearer. I mean, I
Yeah.
suppose all musicians are hearers, but maybe engineers even more so because you're not actually playing the instrument in that role. as a drummer you are, but you know, when you're when you're engineering or mixing, you're have to be all reception. You're taking it all in and and interpreting it in a way that you can reflect back to bring out again the best that the song has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
well, I was going to ask you about being a drummer, but what were you going to say?
Well, no, I was going to say, you know, and I think that's what makes a lot of all of my favorite musicians or all my favorite mix engineers have tended to be drummers.
Yeah, talk to me about that.
I think it's interesting that for me, you know, and I've actually gotten more compliments from even just as a tracking engineer in town about how I approach even microphone selection, whatever. I
Mhm.
approach engineering always from a musician's background.
Mm.
I was never I came to engineering after I was a musician first. I was a touring drummer for like
Mhm.
years in
Mhm.
town, and then I got tired of doing the road thing. And you know,
Yeah.
it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So I eventually, you know, made my way into the other side, and I think it informs as a drummer, particularly in the band. You know, you got to listen to the singer who's generally only listening to themselves and the guitar player. You got the guitar player who, you know, and these are obviously super generalizations, you know, that I'm gonna make,
They're
you
funny.
know, but everybody is living in their own bubble to a certain
Yeah.
extent on a stage, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and for whatever their motivations may be, but the drummer has to connect everything together.
Exactly.
It was always my job to make sure I was hearing the bass player and I was locking in tight with him. Had
Yeah.
to be able to listen to the guitar player to make sure that we are in the same emotional spot. You know, the vocalist can dictate, hey, we're going to change this form up right here, right
Right
now.
now. Yeah.
You know, so it was always imperative that I think the drummer is just so used to taking the bigger picture in.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
I think it informs a lot of good mix decisions, to be quite honest, you know.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, that's what you want from a drummer is to be someone, again, that receptive thing, you know, really, really listening, able to
Mhm.
put it all together. And also, though, at the same time, the engine is the drummer, I think of as the engine of the band. And so,
Absolutely.
you know, you have a lot of authority as the drummer, same as I do as the lead vocalist. You know,
That's true.
you could get into a power play with that.
It's
Those are
true.
the kind of the two power spots in terms of how this is really going to play out, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, somebody told me recently, and it's absolutely true, you know, the sounds of records anymore, honestly, it used to be, it used to be the guitar player. Now,
Mhm.
anything else, the drummer dictates the sound of a record.
Oh man, so much, especially
So much
with
power.
pop, you know,
Yeah.
especially with pop. And I was going to say back to the mixing my vocal thing. One of the things I liked about the way you mixed my vocal is you mixed it like a pop vocal where it
I did.
stood
Yeah.
out from the band in its
Mhm.
own little, you know, it's kind of in its own little bubble, not in a bad way that it's separated from the band, but in pop mixes, the vocal really stands
It
alone,
does. Yeah.
you know?
And I think we've gone even further on the newest one that we just did, which I even like, you know, I really like how your vocal turned out on that mix in particular.
Cool. Yeah, this is a
Sounds
whole
really good to me, but
yeah, I've just been listening to that mix now. Michael and I are working on a new this is going to be my next release. So this is hot off the press. It's called Precious Kisses. And
I
it's
hope I'm not ruining anything by
oh
saying
no,
saying
that's
that.
okay.
Okay.
Well, I did want to touch on this. We have just a few more minutes and I wanted to touch on this before we close. That song, we'll have a release date for you soon on that, but I wanted to let you know, Mike, that I
Mhm.
may be putting some backing vocals onto those final
Awesome.
choruses, right? Because
Yeah.
like we were talking about, the song it's gotta get more dramatic, like a
Yeah.
really good movie. You know, songs are actually a lot like movies. Movies are more like songs than they are like books, in that the shape of it, you know, there has to be hooks and the drama has to hook you. And with a song, it's got to get to that point where I mean you've already kind of won your listener over with the authenticity of your message and the adroitness of your music, but you also want it to just be this big emotional thing in some cases. And the song that we're working on now, this new one, Precious Kisses, it's a I don't know, it's kind of a pop ballad, I think. Would you call it a pop ballad? I never know what to call what I do.
Yeah, that's tough. It is kind of, and I honestly I did approach it more from a pop perspective. for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I could see it having some big vocals at the end so that it does that big drama hook thing like a good movie.
Yeah.
And I will know in a few days whether that's going to work or not, but that's the next step with that song. I also have mixes you're going to be working on of videos I'm making. Right now, just have one that's in process with David Dorn and Grady Saxman and Tim Galloway and Tim Denbo, same band that recorded these two songs, but we're having them record at home. You know, it's a lockdown video with everyone's part separately tracked. And so it'll be a simpler mix because we can't do a whole lot of overdubs, but it'll be a version of the title track of this EP I'm just releasing called I'm the One. And it will have some of my it will have some of my electric uke on it. So you'll get to deal with that, my very rough playing. So
I'm sure it'll be great.
Yeah, we got that coming up too. So I'm excited about that. And I hope we can have another conversation and get
and you know, there is one thing I wanted to say before we leave for every artist. All right, if there's any artists out there, the awesome thing about doing your mixes in particular is that you don't just throw, and I hate for lack of a better term, you just don't throw crap at the wall and hope that it sticks to make a song better. There are so many people that produce songs that just keep adding part after part after part in the hope that eventually it's going to be awesome and huge.
Mm-hmm.
That never works. If I have 30 guitar tracks, I can guarantee you it's going to sound thinner and smaller at the end of the day than two that are really well thought out, really well done. And you can tell when intent was made with the tracks themselves. And like this new one that we're mixing, and I'm looking at it too, there's not a lot of tracks.
No, and I just had Tim Galloway do an overdub.
Most of the tracks is just drum tracks in general.
Yeah.
But you didn't just throw guitar after guitar after guitar on there. And it makes it so much bigger. It makes it so, it works. It's so much easier to do a mix when people have given conscious effort and conscious thought into the parts that they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Say that.
Yeah. No, that's a great statement. And it's true because every part has reason to be there. There's nothing gratuitous going on. And there's not like reaching after something and trying to grasp it. There's just the performance of what it ought to be as it is. And
and that makes, if you go back and look at like Christina Aguilera's biggest, when she first came out, man, that track, Genie in a Bottle, there's like tracks. That whole song is like 8 total tracks. Precious Kisses that we're doing, man, it had 3 synthesizer parts.
Yeah.
1 guitar part to start. Now there's 2.
Yeah.
Vocal and a drum loop.
Right. That's 7 tracks.
It is honestly, my favorite mix that I've done in a very
cool,
easy to mix. And from it was like it was a musical song. There was just so much space because we talked about this too, about how easy it was to fit vocal effects in there and make them shine.
Yeah.
There isn't a million parts trying to cover up what the vocal needs to do.
Right. And taking up that space, frequency space and level space and physical dimensional space and emotional space.
Exactly. Because you get a guitar player just ringing out notes just to hear himself speak. And all of a sudden, all of that space for where a vocal effect can really pull you in emotionally is gone.
Yeah.
Because we don't have that, it makes it so much easier to connect with the vocalist. Way easier.
Right. That's a good point. And the other thing that I think we're doing with what we started out this discussion discussing regarding genre, because there's not a specific genre. There aren't a lot of conventions that you really need to go to with this kind of the material that I write and produce anyway. So it's not like a country mix where, this goes here, the pedal steel goes here, this goes here, the vocal goes here, and you're going to get that lovely sound. But there's a lot more open questions with this kind of a thing.
There is. And again, I that makes it so much easier for me, honestly. I love listening to references, but at the same time, man, it's just, then you're always comparing yourself to somebody else and you're not,
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we want to create art. So it's great to have people tell me they want it to sound like something, but man, if I don't have to make it, if I can just make it sound like this.
Yeah. Like itself.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, man, I remember watching it was that HBO special with Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre about their relationship. I
Hmm.
can't remember it off the top of my head right now, but he says at one point, Jimmy Iovine says, if you're not making the record you're working on sound original, then you're doing it wrong. If you're
Right.
doing something else, and this is my own words, but if you're chasing somebody else, then you are going to endlessly chase something you're never going to attain.
No, because it'll never be yours because it wasn't yours to begin with.
No.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, do you want somebody to be like, oh man, that song sounds like this?
Well,
Like, do you want
yeah,
people to
no.
draw that comparison in their head to begin with? It's like,
Right. And
why have references?
right, right. And I mean, I suck at that anyway. If I ever try to imitate something, it just sounds fake. So now I do bring references, I do bring references in when I come in and work with those guys, and
Sure.
starting from scratch. So I'll play them Borns and I'll play them Imagine Dragons, or I'll play, all different, whole wide range of stuff, just for say, it might be because of a synth sound or a drum pattern or a tempo or a feel, or it's four on the floor and look what they did here or whatever. But
that's different than
that's
being
different.
I want my vocal effects to be like this song, and it's got to match that kind of thing exactly.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
those things worked for that song.
Right, right.
Doesn't necessarily work for this song, and that's cool that you know that song or whatever. But like,
Right,
do we
right.
want to sound? Imagine if Pink Floyd had gone into the studio and been like, "Hey, we want this song to sound or this record to sound exactly like the Beatles' last record." That would be such a detriment to the record
Yeah.
they're working on, because then you'd be like, well, we got to have these kind of songs, we got to have this kind of songwriting, we got to have these kind of effects. You're not going to get that creativity to a certain extent,
Right. Oh, absolutely. So what I want you to do is make me sound like me.
Exactly. Yeah. You should sound like the best version of yourself.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So
So great. Okay, well, I think we're going to return to this discussion when we have some more material once Precious Kisses is out for sure,
awesome.
and possibly also if the video that I'm working on of I'm the One may be out before then, and perhaps we can talk about the mix for that, which will be a very different discussion.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. That'll be a different challenge. I'm looking forward to it. So
Yeah. Cool. All right.
awesome. It's so good to talk to you about this. It's awesome.
Yeah. We could do this all day, but we're gonna let it go now.
I know. I could talk about this for another hour. So
I know. All right.
All right. Well, it's good to talk to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.